6 things about living in the South. And this is coming from Birmingham, Alabama. And I've been here for a year now. I lived in New Mexico for 7 years before this, and I grew up around California area. Number 1, the trees and cracked sidewalks. When I first moved here, that was mostly my perception of what the South is, when I try to figure out, what is it exactly? And the prominent feature to me seems just a bunch of trees and cracked sidewalks. Now, as I've been here, I've learned a lot more complicated things about the South, like, the Mardi Gras and the food and a lot of other stuff I'll be talking about. But that was my initial impression, was it's all trees and cracked sidewalks. Number 2, styrofoam cups. Very quickly when I was here, I saw people using styrofoam cups, and it was very strange to me. I wasn't used to that because in my preconceived notion of styrofoam, it was bad for the environment. And it turns out that a quick Google search revealed that my intuition, which was probably based on something I heard throughout the years, is that styrofoam actually is bad for the environment. So it's true, but it is strange to see that it's just so commonly used here and nobody seems to think about it. Like people have big old styrofoam cups that they're just drinking sodas out of, and even in the morning. And I went to a luncheon, and for lunch they had sweet tea served in a styrofoam cup. There was no coffee, which is what I needed and expected was coffee at a lunch kind of talk gathering, but just sweet tea and styrofoam cup to drink. Number 3, people in the South don't care what you think about the South or people from the South. I know that in other areas they have a lot of strong opinions about the South and the people of the South, but they literally don't talk about them at all over here, which is actually refreshing and kind of nice. And that was a contrast between New Mexico, where I lived in Albuquerque, where the weird thing about Albuquerque is that people lived there. Obviously, they choose to live there, but the majority of people didn't seem to like to live there. But here, the people who live in the South actually like living in the South, and they don't care what other people think about the people in the South or the South. Number 4, they get excited about unique things. And I was trying to think of what the title exactly would be. It's kind of like they get excited about dilapidated things or old things or the history. But the example is there's a Facebook page. It's probably the largest Facebook page among Alabama or about Alabama. And it's called Forgotten Alabama. And people just post old falling apart buildings. One person posted an old van that was rusting that they saw on the side of the street, and talked about just how they came upon the van. And you'll find that there's hundreds of people that like these posts, and tons of comments on these posts about some random building that's falling apart, some random rusting van on the side of the road. It's just kind of boggling to me how engaged these people are by just random falling apart things in Alabama. So they appreciate unique things, or generally they just kind of appreciate the local area and the simplicity of the local area. Number 5, Southern hospitality is a myth. Basically, Southern hospitality, in my view, is marketing thing. Every region has a way that they market themselves. The U.S. obviously has the eagle and the flag and the freedom and all of these things that make the U.S. what it is. The South has its own marketing. Texas, of course, has very strong, sort of marketing perception that people have about it. And oftentimes these perceptions aren't actually aligned with the reality. So Southern hospitality is a myth. But I want to say that doesn't mean that people aren't hospitable in the South. I want to say that it's not different from other locations. So generally, I think that people across the globe are pretty hospitable and generally good. When you approach a stranger, most people's response at the beginning is to be good and to try to develop a good relationship with them. And so I'm just claiming that it's not exactly different in the South than it is in other areas. And number 6, people attach to people and places. So one of the interesting observations that I have come upon here in the South is that there's very kind of niche communities. So within a city, people are really attached to that city. Often it could be like a really small town, and people in that really small town are really attached to that town. There might be another like collection of people that live 5 minutes away, but they're like it's like a whole different city or town or energy of those people. So they're very close knit, basically. And that also means that they tend to go to the same places. So if there's like a bar, it tends to be like the same people that you see at that same bar. And those people don't go to a bunch of different bars in the city in general. They stay within that one bar or within a small collection of bars in that area. And so it's just sort of kind of restricted to a small group or like a tight community of people is the general thing. So you could like go to one bar and then go to another that's like 5 blocks away, and the two crowds that go to those places like never intermix with each other. They don't go across the two places. It's like a whole different place. And like I've heard of sort of conflicts within like a strip mall community of some new business comes in and the coffee shop is like eyeing that new business, and the new business is eyeing the coffee shop. Probably because they're competing with each other, and they're worried that their way of life could change because of this change. So that's number 6. People attached to people and places. And I think it's related to this thing of, this very kind of isolated thing that I've observed here. For example, I went to a really small town in Alabama, and I was trying to find Bob Dylan clothes for Halloween because I wanted to dress like Bob Dylan for Halloween. And I go in this flea market or this thrift store, and the guy's like, "What you looking for?" I was like, "Oh, I'm trying to find, like these brown shades and a kind of cool jacket. I want to look like Bob Dylan." And he's like, "Oh, I don't know who Bob Dylan is. I'm not really aware of what they're listening to these days." I'm just like, how is this dude sitting here? He's been sitting here in this small town of Alabama, and he doesn't know who Bob Dylan is. How does this happen? And it's a little bit like the South is like a different country, like the North. You could probably subdivide the U.S. into maybe like 4 different countries. I'm not certain, but there is some value of thinking of the South as a different country. And the notion that this dude in the small town had never heard of Bob Dylan before is kind of like, I don't know, he's almost living in his own little country there too. Another related story, I was at this party and I had my John Prine t-shirt on. It says, "Blow up your TV." And this guy, he was like in his 50s, really like into the local art community, kind of like, he'd made some film stuff and, expressive artistic guy. And he's like, "Blow up your TV. What does that mean?" Like it was a political statement that I was making, which, I told him about the political sort of related message that it means. But I also said, "Oh, and it's all," and, when after I explained all that and he was kind of quiet, I was like, "Oh, well, it's also a John Prine lyric." And he's like, "Oh, well, I don't know who that is. I don't know what the kids are listening to these days." I'm just like, silence. I have no response for that. If John Prine is anything like what the kids are listening to these days. But there's sort of, and this is related, the sort of niche communities in the South is related to the notion as well that there are people who are famous in the South who are not known anywhere else. So they're in a little community, you'll have people who are famous in that community that people outside that community don't even know who they are. And that's particularly true of Texas. Like there's guys like Stoney LaRue and Jason Bolin who are just famous in Texas. Like when they play music, they just draw a huge crowd and it's like amazing. And maybe they're not big outside of Texas. And it doesn't even matter. Like who cares? As long as you're big, where you live, that's fine and good. So there are people like that here in the South that others don't know of. So there's so one of them is Gip Gibson. Gip used to have Gip's Place. He passed away, but there's a documentary about him, and it was a juke joint, one of the last surviving juke joints in Alabama, and like that is a big deal. Everybody around here knows about Gipp's Place. And it was actually really important because like it's music and it brings together brings together African Americans and white people, and they're all just enjoying music in a time when that might have not have been going on here in Alabama, like way back when. You know, another one is Country Boy Eddie. People here all know all about Country Boy Eddie. It's like they grew up with him because he was on the TV, and I don't know, every day there was Country Boy Eddie on the TV, so he was like a big deal and famous here, but most other people don't know who he is. And another one is Rick and Bubba. They're like a really popular kind of like talking, interviewing folks group. So everybody here knows Rick and Bubba, but like people outside of the area, they don't know about Rick and Bubba. And just a little hot tip for you, if you ever see the Rick and Bubba van at a live show, you go out to see some music and you see the Rick and Bubba van out there, the big logo on the side of a van, just turn around, don't go inside, just trust me on that one. So those are my 6 observations about the South. Let me know in the comments below what you think. If you got any additions, if you got any comments on the examples I mentioned. Hit that subscribe and the bell if you want to support my channel, and stay tuned to my posts. I post 1 post per week every Sunday, and it's about my music and my live shows and my musical related experiences. And hit that like if you like. Feel free to share if you want to share. Thanks for checking out this video.